So when I was in like 10th grade, my English teacher introduced us to a poem by Edwin Arlington Robinson. It's actually a pretty famous poem. It's about a man who has it all: wealth, status, admiration. The poem says this character was richer than a king, admirably schooled in every grace, and finally thought he was everything to make us wish we're in his place. Now that's the type of person everyone wants to be. Bruce Wayne meets Great Gatsby. And the character's name? Richard Cory. So now I'm paying attention because I'm also Richard Cory. Then my teacher plays a song about him where the chorus is, I wish that I could be Richard Cory. And of all people, it was Paul McCartney singing the chorus. So imagine that, being 16 years old, sitting in class, reading a poem about me, and hearing one of the biggest rock stars in history singing your name, wishing he could be you. Now, I'm thinking the story ends in a Grammy, but it didn't. Because in the final line of the poem and the song, Richard Cory goes home and takes his own life. I'm in the back of the class like, wait, what? Like, what just happened here? And that final line haunted me because, again, I'm also Richard Cory. And this made me change how I see success. This character had everything except alignment. He lived by appearances, not by purpose. And that begs the question, what actually makes us happy? Achievement or alignment? Because we can have all the success in the world, but without alignment, without a structure that matches who you are with what you value, then your success is hollow, and that's when it comes crashing down. Success without structure is just a beautiful crash waiting to happen. Now, speaking of crashing, I grew up in Fort Lauderdale, and from the time I could walk, my dream was sports, especially football. By the time I was 16, the time I was introduced to the poem, I had some scholarship opportunities on the table and a growing medical chart. How do I say this? I was injury prone, broken leg, torn shoulders, both of them, torn ACL. My friends started calling me Crash. Yeah, on the outside I laughed, but on the inside I was angry. I went from highlight reels to hospital bills. That wasn't funny at all. By the time I was 18, 4 surgeries later, I was literally like limping across campus, asking myself, what just happened? Who am I now? Because everything that I thought defined me had disappeared. I had to completely reinvent myself and find new structure. So in college, I pivoted to music. I love music. So I started a record label. Signed some artists, I was promoting shows, and I thought I was producing music. But what I was really creating was alignment. I was building structure. Because every deal I made, every show I promoted, every late night in the studio taught me the same thing. Ambition builds momentum. Structure builds direction. Without structure, ambition is just running in circles. And this is the difference between movement and progress. Between laying down like the character Richard Cory or standing up like the one before you today. This was my pivot. When I realized success isn't about chasing opportunity. It's about building order around it. Now, this pivot led me to go to law school, and that's where everything finally clicked. For me, when I went to law school, it wasn't only about learning rules and laws and regulations. It was about learning how to think, calculating conscious choice. Legal reasoning is a simple framework. It's called IRAC. No, it's not the country, it's the method. It's an acronym. It stands for Issue, Rule, Analysis, Conclusion, IRAC. The issue is the heart of the problem you're trying to solve. What's really at stake here? The rule is the principal truths you can stand on. This is what stops emotion from driving your next decision. The analysis is where you test the rules against the facts, find out what works and what doesn't. It's where logic meets experience. And the conclusion is where you decide your next move. When creativity and structure align and you decide what to do next. Now, it's simple deductive logic. But the art of legal reasoning is separating what feels true from what is true. And I realized This isn't just for attorneys. It's a universal roadmap for success. Think of it as the GPS of logical reasoning. You plug in where you are, define where you're going, and step by step the path appears. It's the blueprint of truth. Now, by this time in my life, let's talk more about dreams. By this time in my life, I had gone from music to law, so that was my dream. So after law school, I started a firm from my mom's living room. I had no staff, no office, no safety net, just a belief in myself and a framework. Now, I had the support of my family, but pretty much everyone around me told me I would fail. And part of me believed them, especially when they laughed at me. You know how hard that was, trying to chase something that I love and being laughed at? And to be honest with you, I was terrified. I was afraid of failing, afraid of not being good enough, of not being ready. And it reminded me of the character, Cory, but I couldn't lay down. So fear is something we can all relate to. It's something we all experience. So let's run it through IRAC. Issue. Why was I afraid? Rule. Fear comes from the unknown. We only fear what we don't understand. Analysis. I had to ask myself what I didn't know. Well, at that time, I definitely didn't know how to run a law firm, didn't know how to get clients, run a business, or build trust. So the conclusion was, learn what I don't know, and if I have to do it scared, so be it. And that's what I did. Step by step, I studied, I learned, I practiced, I failed, but I adjusted and tried again. I did not lay down. And each time I applied IRAC, the problem got smaller and I became stronger. The more I understood, the less I feared. And eventually, that living room startup became the law practice I'm still running right here today. So my father helped me get out of my mom's house and into my first real office. So I leased a space from basically a broom closet from another firm. Now imagine this, a little tiny desk, no windows, like flickering fluorescent light, very little clients, and a lot of bills. And like many of us have, in fact, probably all of us have, there were many nights I sat there in silence, staring at the walls, just wondering, how am I gonna get through this? And my ego was too big to admit that I had doubts, but I really had no idea how I was gonna do this. So I ran it through IRAC. Issue. How do I keep going when everything inside me says to quit? The rule was simple. Even when everything around me felt uncertain, you can't control everything. However, if I can control the structure, I can shape the outcome. So here's the analysis. Order creates direction. With a framework, alignment can be built by design. So focus on the process, on what I can control. My thoughts, my routine, my preparation, my effort, my focus. And the conclusion was, keep showing up. Every single day, no matter what, no matter how hard it gets, and especially when no one's looking. You know, not every conclusion has to be a major breakthrough. In this case, the answer was endurance, choosing not to quit, not to lay down like the character we talked about earlier. And that's what IRAC does. We bridge the gap between emotion, ambition, and logic. You define your issue, find the rule, connect the facts, decide what's next. This turns fear into clarity, and clarity is power. Because when you know your issue, you stop spinning. When you define your rule, you stop guessing. When you analyze, you stop procrastinating. Then you conclude by making the next step forward with confidence. Now, I use this in the courtroom, but you don't have to be an attorney to think like one. We all face things that may feel impossible from time to time. But use IRAC, you stop reacting and you start reasoning. So the next time you feel stuck, whether it's in your job, your relationships, your goals, even your confidence, here's the assignment. 1, ask the right question honestly. Don't let noise define the problem. 2, search for the rules that guide you. Find the truths that apply to the situation. 3, test it with the facts. Don't just guess. Apply your truths. This will give you clarity on the path forward. Then, you conclude by acting on the smallest, clearest step you can take right here, right now, today. You do this, and fear turns to focus. Purpose turns to progress, and progress is your proof. Because as you continue to analyze, you won't just uncover the path forward. You'll uncover new truths in need of more conclusions. And that's when the process begins again and again and again. And each time you refine your analysis, you not only reach new conclusions, you continue to evolve. This is logic in motion. And when logic and truth align, you don't just build strategy, you unlock possibility. Because if you can analyze it, you can learn it. And if you can learn it, you can master it. That's the beauty of structure. No matter the issue, this goes for anything. If it can be structured, it can be built, and that's when it becomes real. So no matter the issue, no matter your dream, when you apply structure to possibility, a dream stops being distant. It becomes a plan. And a plan, repeated with discipline, becomes a habit. Let me tell you something. Habits build competence. Competence creates confidence. And confidence grounded in truth is not an illusion. It becomes something very real, very tangible. Because as you see it more, it becomes more clear. As it becomes more clear, you believe in it more. As you believe in it more, you take more steps towards it. Each step is progress. And that's what IRAC does. It measures your progress, accelerates your learning, and brings order to the chaos. Now that's when I finally understood the guy in the poem. This character, Richard Cory, had everything except structure. He built a life that looked perfect on the outside, but the inside had no framework. Without structure, even the strongest dreams are nothing but a house of cards. And that's why his story ended in tragedy in the last line of the poem. But your story, my story, it won't. Because we won't lay down. We changed that last line. True success has nothing to do with chance. It's not about talent. It's not about luck. It's about alignment. Knowing who you are and what you want and building a structure to match it on purpose. So the next time that you find yourself in a setback, I mean, it sounds cliche, but I'm serious. If you have a setback in a decision, a dream, a goal, don't just wish. Don't just hope. And definitely don't lay down. Run it through the framework, IRAC. Write your issue, define your rule, analyze your reality, then act on your conclusion. This will be your first win. Then repeat. Because wishful thinking is belief without structure. However, when you connect who you are with what you do, your life stops being accidental and it becomes intentional. Structure turns imagination into form. Action turns that form into reality. And that's when you stop wishing and you start building. Because the world doesn't need another character, Richard Cory. Someone who looks complete on the outside but is empty on the inside. Someone who lays down and crumbles like a house of cards. It needs people that build lives that work. Life's built on truth, not appearances. And when you use structure to build that truth, when you turn I wish into I plan, then the line that we've all whispered to ourselves, the same line Paul McCartney once sang, I wish that I can be, I wish that I could be, becomes simply and powerfully, I am. My name is Richard Cory. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today.